Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us this evening. This is John McDougall. I am the event coordinator here at Murdered by the Book in Houston, coming to you with another live virtual event. But before we get to them, just want to make some general store announcement stuff. First up, we are open. If you haven't come to visit us for a while, the store is open for browsing. We do ask that you mask up when you come in. We are still closed on Sunday, so our hours are 10 to 6, Monday through Saturday. We know not everybody is getting out and about lately, so we don't have a table outside for curbside pickup anymore, but we're still doing curbside pickup. So if you don't want to come in, or you're just in a hurry and you want us to run books out to you, you can always give us a call when you pull into the parking lot. We're always happy to do that, pandemic or not. Always available through murderbooks.com. We've got a lot of great stuff coming up. Tomorrow night, McKenna is going to be back with us to be doing a virtual event for the Palm Springs Noir collection. It'll be Barbara DeMarco Barrett, who's the editor, leading a panel discussion with Eric Beatner, Janet Fitch, and Eduardo Santiago. Next Tuesday, I'm going to be chatting with Laura Griffin and Rachel Grant about their new romantic suspense books. We also just confirmed next Saturday, October 2nd at noon, we're going to be doing an event for the Daggers Drawn collection for the Dagger Awards, and that's going to be the editor Maxim chatting with several of the authors, including Martin Edwards, who we're big fans of. So we hope you will definitely check that out. Definitely check out the calendar at murderbooks.com. It's got the full roster of everything. As you know, we're doing everything virtual still. We did try to get a couple of in-store things on the books for September, but then the Delta variant started spiking. So we had to cancel all of those. At the moment, the plan is virtual for the rest of 2021. We've got a couple of things cooking for 2022 that we're hoping can happen in store. So we're just kind of playing that by ear. So like I said, definitely check out the website for more info about all of our upcoming events. And if you've missed anything, of course, they're always on the store's YouTube and Facebook channel. But for this evening, we're super excited to get Katie Lattari and Eliza Jane Brazier out on screen. So we're going to start with Katie and bring her out. How are you tonight, Katie?
I'm well. How are you?
I'm doing well. Congratulations on the debut novel.
Thank you so much.
So for those of you who might know, her debut novel, Dark Things I Adore, just came out on September 14th from Sourcebooks. And Katie holds a Bachelor of Arts and a Master's of Arts in English from the University of Maine, and a Master of Fine Arts in Fiction, Writing, and Prose from the University of Notre Dame. As I mentioned, Dark Things I Adore is her debut novel. And we're super excited tonight to have Eliza Jane Brazier with us again. How are you tonight?
I am excellent. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for leading the discussion with us. And I know we got to do an event with you when your novel came out, right?
Yep. And it was super fun with Stephanie Roble.
Stephanie Roble, that's right.
Yeah.
So if you guys want to hear, she's definitely going to talk a little bit about her book tonight, but if you want to hear some more talk specifically about her novel, If I Disappear, you can check that out on YouTube. But as we mentioned, she's going to be leading tonight's discussion. So her book, If I Disappear, is about to come out in paperback in November. So you can either pre-order the paperback or you can order the hardcover from us. And let me get her official bio pulled up here. So Eliza Jane Brazier is an author, screenwriter, and journalist. If I Disappear was her adult debut. She currently lives in Los Angeles, where she is developing If I Disappear for television. If you have questions for either author while they're chatting tonight, please post those in the live chat on YouTube or the comments on Facebook, and we will get to those in a little bit. But for now, I'm going to turn it over to Eliza and let them chat, and I will see you guys in just a little bit.
Hello. First off, I want to say thank you so much to Murder by the Book for having us. And I just also want to say, you can, I think that they'll have links below where you can buy Katie's book, you can buy my books, you can buy any books you want. It's so important right now, especially more than ever, to support indie bookstores so that we can keep having these amazing stories, amazing storytellers, and people like Katie bringing books to us. So I guess I first heard about your book, I think through our agent, right? We have,
I think
Sarah.
so.
Yeah. So Sarah sent me your book to blurb, and I read like the first, I think maybe couple of sentences, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is so good. I mean, your writing is so beautiful. You create this like really realistic world in both of your timelines.
Thank you.
And it was also just like, it was so suspenseful, so compelling a story. But like right away, the first thing I was blown away by was for sure the writing. Like it's just so accomplished, so beautiful, and like sort of like decadent and artful. Would you mind giving us kind of like the pitch of Dark Things I Adore?
Yeah, sure. So thanks to Murder by the Book. This is so cool to be here. Thank you so much, Eliza, for doing this with me. This is like awesome. I love your book. So this is like a super honor for me to be talking to you. So this is cool. Yeah, so Dark Things I Adore is at its heart a revenge thriller. And it's told over two distinct timelines, one in 2018 and one in 1988. And in the present day 2018 timeline, we have Audra Colfax, who's this very talented, accomplished art student who's about to graduate with an MFA in painting, but she's working on her thesis collection up in her remote home in Maine. She's finishing it up. And she's lured her predatory and kind of manipulative professor, Max Durant, up to Maine. She says, well, I want you to come to look at my thesis paintings, tell me how I'm doing. He thinks he's going up there because he senses like a sexual tension between them. So he thinks that's what it's all about. Audra has like very different plans, much more devious, much darker plans for why she's invited him up there. And that sort of unravels over the weekend as you see what's going on there. In the 1988 timeline, we're with this sort of young, eclectic group of artists at the Lupin Valley Arts Collective and also in remote Maine. And this group of artists they're kind of an intense group. And as time goes on, some secrets and abuses start to kind of burble up in this group. And as the book unfolds, you start to see how the timeline in 1988 is really impacting the timeline in 2018. And you see that these things from the past are coming back to haunt Max in a major way. And he doesn't know it yet, but Audra's there to help him figure it out. So
I love that. So I guess I want to talk, like, what was the sort of original like germ of the idea that started this book, and maybe like additional inspirations?
Yeah. So I remember when I first started writing this book in 2017, and I remember at that time I was writing, it was still a professor, it was still a student, and it was still like visual arts involved painting. But that version of the book was, I think that the student was kind of stumbling into figuring out that this professor used some pretty grisly inspiration to get to their paintings. And the storyline here is a little different, where the student kind of understands from the get what's going on. And so it's more about figuring out sort of the reader seeing what this professor has done over time and why Audra is on the mission she's on. So I'm not sure what inspired the art thing, but I just remember being really struck by that idea of sort of art being involved, painting, a professor and a student, and that dynamic, and somebody having to figure something out in their relationship. And from there, it just kind of went on, and here we are 4 years later.
What do you think like made you sort of stick with this and see it through to the end? Like, did you have like initial sort of like feedback? Did you work with like critique partners? Was it like an agent that kind of spurred you? Because I think like, as creators, we do get like sort of, you can have so many different ideas, and there's these ones that, that hang on to you and just like stay with you long enough to actually like germinate to create something that's such like a layered and amazing work. So what do you think that kind of was for you?
I think so. I had a long sort of process prior to writing this book of trying to figure out what kind of writer I wanted to be in general. I think after grad school, I kind of felt like a little bit lost in terms of what my thing was and what I really loved and what I wanted to do and how writing would manifest in my life now that I was out of school. And so I went through like a lot of soul searching about that. And I wrote a lot of different kinds of things. And I went to therapy and I started to figure some stuff out. And basically I just was like, oh, I am like I love true crime. I love mystery. I love thrillers. This is what I consume all day, every day via books and podcasts and everything else, documentaries. Why am I not trying to write the stuff that I love to read? And so when this idea came along, I kind of was in this period of revelation where I was like, oh, let me try this. And I think just having that clarity of purpose where I was like, oh, like try sticking with something that you actually love the idea for, that you're really into, that you would want to read yourself, right? And I think that's what kept me going. It was I was pretty solitary process. I didn't really show it to anyone until I showed, I think, my husband, before I sent it out to query for agents.
Oh,
really.
wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, so I guess like related to that, I kind of like, I love to hear like kind of the whole journey. So when did you, I mean, I guess, when did you start reading first? Like, were you always a reader? Was that like something that you growing up, like, was there sort of like an attachment to reading first?
Yeah, so I think actually it's weird. I was definitely always into reading, but I feel like too, in my case, I felt like I was always into writing more, in the sense that when I was younger, I think I did more writing than reading. And of course, as I got older, that kind of evened out, or kind of went the opposite way, where you start to get more into reading. But because I think I'm sort of a naturally slow reader sometimes, and so I think sometimes that can kind of stymie me a little bit. And so I was more of a consummate writer. I had Trapper Keepers with Loose Leaf and all this, and I was always writing little poems and stories and stuff. And as I got older and got more into school and sort of all that kind of stuff, I got really into reading, and love reading, of course, now, all those sorts of things. But yeah, it was more of like the opposite for me as I was,
so
coming up.
Did you always kind of like want to be a writer? Because what did you, so you, sorry, he said that you majored in
Yeah, in English, right.
Okay. So you sort of always wanted to be a writer?
I did. I always knew that. I think the first instinct was like, oh, I love writing. I love English class. I'll be like a teacher, probably. Okay. That was sort of the thought process. But I was like, I want to be able to keep reading. I want to be able to keep writing. I'm in love with all that stuff. I'm in love with my lit classes. How can I keep that going, basically? Yeah. And so that's what I majored in. And I wasn't quite sure what I was going to do. I figured, I really did figure I would be a teacher of some sort. And then I went through undergrad and 2 different master's degrees, and was like, oh, I really like this writing thing. I want to try to do that in some way, shape, or form. It's super hard to just be a writer, I think, these days, So I didn't have any illusions that would be right coming down the pike. But I knew, if I could get a job where I could keep work at work and write in my free time, that would be great. And so that's kind of what I've done.
So you are a teacher, right? I think I heard.
No, I'm not a teacher. I used to. I used to do some I used to teach. I used to do some adjuncting at the college level, but I work in higher ed fundraising, actually. Okay, that's my day job. Yeah.
Okay, so when you were studying, did you do like creative writing courses? Like, did you participate? Like, because I feel like the art camp thing that kind of, to me, like, it speaks to so many different, I guess, like arts programs, like whether like I grew up doing like theater, like I feel like there's that kind of, the sort of world you describe. And so I was just wondering, like, did you sort of have an experience that was kind of like that, whether it be writing or whether it be art, poetry?
Yeah, I think for me, I did. I was always, an English major with a creative writing concentration through all of it. And so I was always in workshops and things like that. And then I think once especially when I hit grad school, and there is something very, as sort of like heady and sort of brainy as that kind of stuff can be. It's also, you meet like really interesting, fun people. There's usually, if you find a good group of people, there's usually a good amount of drinking and have fun and stuff like that. And so there is this sort of sense of, a lot of high-minded kind of big talk at parties and these sorts of things. So there is that kind of, you get these in these little cliques and you're talking about these deep things. And I feel like it's so easy to do that when you sort of find your people, whether it's with other writers or it's if you're a theater person or if you're an artist. I think once you kind of fall into people who have said, I'm opting in to being part of this artsy moment here in grad school or camp or a collective or whatever, it's easy to kind of parse that out into writing about it, I think.
Yeah, what I found like so authentic about like the sort of world that you created is that there usually is like this sort of one very charismatic individual who's not always the most talented person, but for some reason the whole world sort of revolves around them. So I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about that character.
Yeah, I think so. In the camp setting, this character. So everybody at the camp, one of the sort of quirks of this camp, the Lupin Valley Arts Collective, is that the camp director Gus gives everybody sort of a nature-based nickname. So you come there and you're sort of reborn into this nickname. And so the character in 1988, Moss, he's this character who is definitely talented, but he's perhaps not the most talented person in the group. But he does like have this ability to be really, people gravitate toward him. He has a real strong force of will, and he's charismatic. And people, I think there's, in any group, sometimes there tends to be an emotional alpha, and you sort of, everybody else kind of reacts and adjusts around what mood and vibe that person's putting out. And Moss is definitely that character, that person in that group. And so for better or worse, he's kind of sets the tone for the group. Yeah.
Okay, so let's see. I want to kind of talk about like your publication journey, because I feel like those stories are like so interesting, especially for like anyone who's an aspiring writer or even anyone who is a writer, because you're like, oh, that's like different than me. Like it's really interesting. So you wrote the book, you shared it with your husband.
Yeah.
And then, so how long did it take you to write?
So I think it took me to do do a solid draft where I was like, oh, this is like about as good as I can do on my own, kind of, where you're kind of out of ideas for, not that it's great, but you're like, I think I'm at the limit of my ability. I think it took me about a year or 14 months probably to get there. And then I was into this phase where I was kind of tweaking while I was querying. And so I think it took me, and I had queried on a couple other books before and had not gotten anywhere. They weren't thrillers. They were different types of books, but I had never gotten anywhere with an agent. And this time, because I think I understood what my book was and I understood what I really wanted and kind of where this book fit. And I had really written from a place of like honesty with myself and like my truth, as cheesy as that sounds, in terms of like, oh, this is what I want to write. I queried probably for about 5 months and to like dozens, of people. And I got like nibbles from like a quarter, and then Sarah, pretty much right away was like, oh, I'm super into this. And so I think the thing that was really interesting to me, and maybe this is the same for you, is like, I feel like the old sort of thing that everybody always tells you, because it can be very isolating and depressing and tough to get no's and no's and no's and no's. And you're like, oh, okay. Ooh, boy. Okay. Is you only need one, right? I mean, that's the sort of the old advice everybody says, but it's true. You need one person who connects with it, who gets it, who's willing to champion it and stand with it. Yeah. And if you can find that one person, you're well on your way, because that's truly half the battle I have found in publishing, is just like finding the person who's like, I see what you're doing and I get it and I love it. Yeah. Sometimes it takes a while to find that person.
I have to just like jump into and say that like Sarah is like the most awesome, because she's so enthusiastic and she totally is that person. Like, I feel like it was the same for me, that when, whenever she like reached out and spoke to me, it just makes you like see your work in whole new eyes. Yeah. You know what I mean? And it's like, it's the same book it was yesterday, but there's certain people that will jump in and it really does like and it makes it like a real, you're like, oh my gosh, like I can do this. Like, this is so cool.
Totally agreed. And I think for anybody who's out there who's writing and is going through this process now, it's easy to sort of, you're with your work for such a long time. Like for me, it was at least a year that I had been working on it. And after a year of you just sort of sitting with it and working on it, rereading it, and you're like, I'm pretty sure this is good. Like, I believe it's good, but is it good? Yeah. And it is very reaffirming. And also some of the sort of dazzle of like having done it starts to wear off, because you've been in the trenches for so long. And so when you do find somebody who's reading it with totally fresh eyes and is like, whoa, this is amazing. You're like, oh, okay. Is it? Okay, great. I thought it might be good, but I don't know.
So from there, did you two work on it together before you went on sub?
Yeah. So I think mine was sort of on I think this is a good this was a good lesson for me, which is that like my book needed some work for sure. Like, and I'm a little bit of a slow reviser. So it took me and Sarah a full year of like revisions before we both felt comfortable that it was like ready. And so that was tough because I was like, oh, like people sign with agents and then probably like 2 weeks later you're like sending it out, and like for some people I think that does happen and that is true and that's so super cool. That was not my experience. It was long and arduous, but then, you know, as Sarah kept telling me, like the trick with all of this is you want to give publishers as few reasons to say no as possible, right? That's the whole key of all of this. And so I think we did. And she was a great sort of editorial partner. I'm super grateful for all the work we put into it. And then once the book was picked up by Sourcebooks, honestly, again, it was another about year of revision for me. And it's all the same stuff happens in the book. And it sounds like, oh God, did you have to rewrite the whole book? And that's not what happened. It's just, I had to realign certain things, de-emphasize certain things, emphasize other things. All the same characters are here. All the same things happen, but things change to make things better. Yeah.
Well, you know, and I will just like, I mean, I guess you can't really ever sort of say, but I feel like there's with books like yours, I feel like, to me at least, like when I read it, I'm like, I hope this took a long time, because it feels like it took, it did take that you took time with it and really took like a lot of care. And I feel like that really comes across, and it gives it like that extra depth that makes it this sort of almost beautiful, really work of art. So, I mean, if you had written it like super fast, I would have been like, oh my gosh, like what? I mean, geez, because it's like amazing,
Oh, thank you. That's so sweet.
So then you guys took it out. You found your editor.
Yes.
Who's your editor?
MJ Johnston at Sourcebooks, who is amazing. She's so good. Like, it's crazy.
Like and that's the person that's on your team.
Yes, she's like fantastic. She was just as enthusiastic as Sarah, and she totally got it, which is, I think, the first and foremost thing you want to feel when you're working with somebody on your book. You want to feel like, oh, they totally get it. And she saw the vision, and we worked on it together, and it was great.
Okay, so another kind of question. This is something like I'm always kind of curious about. It's kind of like maybe a deep question in a way, but why do you think that you? Well, I guess a two-part question. Why do you write, and why do you publish?
Ooh, that's a great question, and a kind of a tough one. Geez, Louise. I feel like it's such a canned. I hate that I'm even going to say it. It makes me so upset with myself, but there is something to the idea of like, I write because it's just what I do. It's just what I like. I can't not write. Like, you hear people say that and I'm always like, okay, like whatever, but it's kind of true. Like, it really is, in the sense that I have always done it. Some people have hobbies that are, they woodwork, or they build things, or they knit things, or they sew clothes. And they're these really engrossing skills that they sort of take on and do for themselves. And I always did that. I was writing fan fiction. I love writing I still write fan fiction. When I'm not.
Can we pause quickly?
Yeah.
What fan fiction will you say?
Oh gosh, I do a lot of stuff like based off TV shows. I've done like Lost. I've done anything kind of if there's an action element, I love that. I've done like X-Men. I love things where there's sort of action-y.
That's so cool.
Happening. So
that's so different. Sorry, I had to just like pause because I used to write fan fiction. Like, who didn't? But
right. Exactly.
Like,
so it's so fun. So I think it's one of those things where I just was always doing it. So I write because I just really enjoy it. I think it just really comes down to that. I just really enjoy doing it. It's if I wasn't getting published, it would still be my hobby. I would still be doing it. So that's that part of the question, I think. And then, why do I publish? I think, gosh, it is such a good question. I think I publish, or I'm, trying to publish, this is my first commercially published book because, I think the same reason why some people dream of being rock stars or doctors or anything else. I think you're just like, ooh, can I professionalize? Can I be up there with the other big dogs in some way, even though the pool for the big dogs is very big, right? You know what I mean? There's a lot of people who publish books, but the idea of having a finished, published book that's by me in a bookstore, that's sort of like, that's the peak.
I love that we had doctors and rock stars together. Okay, so who are some of your favorite like authors? Do you have like any sort of influences? Are you like one of those people who is inspired by other books, or do you kind of have to turn it off? Are you more inspired by TV shows? Like, where do you sort of, I guess, get your inspiration from?
I really love thrillers and mysteries and police procedurals too, at a certain point. So I really love, I mean, everybody loves her, but there's good reason why, but I love Gillian Flynn. She was the one who really kind of cracked my brain open to all of this, I would say. It hit me at just the right moment. I had the first book of hers I read was Gone Girl, which was like the big, huge one that broke the whole world open. And then I read the rest of her books and I was like, oh, like this person gets it. Like she's amazing. And so I love her. Huge Stephen King fan. I love the Douglas Preston and Lincoln Child Pendergast series, the FBI agent series. That's great. I love Tana French. There's so many good writers out there right now. It's kind of crazy. There's so many good thrillers. I love The Kind Worth Killing by Peter Swanson. There's a lot of really great stuff out there. So there's a ton. I really loved If I Disappear. If I Disappear was so fun. I was like obsessed with If I Disappear. And it hits so beautifully on this moment that we're in the sort of rise and triumph of the true crime podcast as this cultural phenomenon. And it's really beautifully plays with that idea.
Thank you. That's so kind of you to say.
Yeah.
I feel like I can really like those influences, all the influences you named. Like, I feel like I can totally see that in your work. So you live in Maine.
Yes.
So have you ever had a Stephen King sighting or like a sort of like a friend of a friend or something? How big
Maine is sort of one of those places where it feels like a big, small town. Like it's like even though it's kind of a big state and everything's kind of far apart, you still feel like kind of know everybody. And so Stephen King, actually, I live on a street in Bangor called West Broadway. Okay. And Stephen King's kind of like famous red turreted house with the iron gate is on West Broadway in Bangor. So his like famous house is like a couple blocks.
Does he live in that famous house?
He doesn't anymore. He used to. Yeah. But he's actually he's working on turning that property into like where his like papers will reside in his like archive and stuff like that. So it's very cool. But I did see him once when I was little out and about. I can't remember where we were shopping somewhere. And they're very active in the state. He and Tabitha, they're like incredible philanthropists. They go to different things in the state. They reside here half the year, and they're great. Well, I love Stephen King. He's kind of part of the community. He's there.
So this connects, I guess, to my next question. So you chose to set the book in Maine. Yeah. And you're from Maine.
I live in Maine. I'm not from Maine originally, but I am.
You're a Maine. How do you call it? A Maineite?
Mainer.
Mainer. Do you think that was that sort of like a conscious decision on your part? Was it just because it's like write what you know? Or do you feel a sort of connection to that place?
Yeah. So I am originally from Brooklyn, New York, but we moved to Maine. My family moved to Maine when I was 8, so I was little. And I lived in Maine ever since, except for a couple times when I left for school, right? So basically, I've lived in Maine my whole life. And when I first started writing a version of this book, I had set it so in this book, Max is lured up from Boston to Maine, which is like a 4-hour drive, basically. And in one of the previous versions, I had written it that it was the Catskills in upstate New York and New York City. And because my grandparents retired to the Catskills when I was little, so I had a lot of familiarity with the Catskills, had a lot of familiarity with the city. And I was like, ooh, that would be a nice little dichotomy of city to country as well. And for some reason, it just wasn't like clicking for me. And I don't know why. I can't explain it. And then I was like, let me try writing it in Maine. And for some reason, it all fell into place when I started setting it in the sort of Greenville area of Maine. And I think Maine is just a landscape that's sort of ripe for writing about pretty rhapsodically, because it's got a little bit of everything. It has sort of the rocky coast, it has mountains, it has lakes, it has thousands upon thousands of acres of like completely unincorporated wilderness. It's just got it all. And it's a fun place to write about. Yeah, so it all fell into place.
Yeah, I feel like it, and it really kind of comes through like in that 2018 timeline, like when she takes him to this place and it's like he's so out of place and like it's like her home. So she has like that kind of home court advantage, you know, and you really bring out this kind of like eeriness, which I guess you could have said it was the Catskills and perhaps we wouldn't know.
Right, I know. And for some reason I couldn't like get myself to do that for some reason. It's really weird.
Okay, so I'm going to ask more writing questions because that's like what I love to ask. What do you think is the hardest part about writing?
The hardest part about writing, so yeah, I can only speak for myself, but I think for me, it's the two end pieces. It's getting started and then sticking with that. When you are like, oh, I'm going to try to write an 80,000 word thing, and you feel like, oh, I put down 272 words. You're like, this is the worst. What am I doing with my time? What am I doing with my life? These aren't even good. These words aren't even good. These 272 words, you know? So I think that's one of the hardest parts is starting it and being like having the faith and the sort of stick-to-itiveness to keep going, even when you're not sure what you're doing. And then the other hardest part for me is revision, for sure. It's a tricky thing to have to sort of realign. I think of I've talked about this before, but I think of any story as sort of an ecosystem. And so like right in an ecosystem, if the wetlands dry up, that affects this and that, and it's a chain reaction. And it's the same thing in stories. If you change something in a story, the way a character behaves, if you take a character out, if you put them in a different setting, it ripples out to a lot of different stuff. And so I think all of those little adjustments and realignments and stuff like that can be really hard to sort of re-see your work with fresh eyes and not be like, how would I ever do this? I've been reading it the same way for a year and a half. How do I change the way I'm thinking about it?
Yeah, absolutely. So I actually have heard you talk about this before, but I'm going to pretend that I haven't so that I can ask you. What is like your sort of writing? Do you have like a writing routine?
Right. So yeah. So I'm one of those people where I wish I did. I do find it very noble and romantic.
Noble.
And I wish I could be that person, because there are people who are like, oh yeah, every day I get up at 5 and I write from 5 to 6, and then that's how I do it. Or they say I write from 11 to midnight every day and I never miss a day. And I'm like, that is so amazing. I am not that person. I am the kind of person who kind of can sit for a long time and think and ruminate. And then when it's time to go, I can really sit down and get a lot done. But there'll be weeks, months at a time where I don't write anything, except maybe fan fiction just for fun. But in terms of really trying to construct something where it's like me trying to write a book or something, it could be long stretches of time. And so I've used this term before, but I consider myself a tea kettle writer, where I burble for a really long time, and then suddenly it's ready and the steam shoots out and I can get a lot done.
Awesome.
What is your process like? How do you write?
I mean, I'm kind of like similar to you in a way, I guess, because like I don't write all the time. Like if I'm at the point now where like hopefully no one, but if I don't have to do it, I'm not going to. So a lot of my friends, I don't know. I feel like when I first started in like this business, like 6 years ago, like I used to be like, oh my gosh, I need to like keep writing and then publishing more books and da 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 da. And it's like, you know what? I finally got to the point where I was like, no, I don't. Like you see people that are like, who seem to have like a very prolific output, and you're like, oh, I need to be like that because that's like what success is. But I think for me, I finally kind of like realized, you know, if you have time off, take it, because burnout is real.
Yes.
So I am kind of like you in that, like, I will just chill. And like, usually what I'm motivated by is money.
That's fair, dude. That's totally fair.
Goes off. Okay. So related to this question, are you a plotter or a pantser? I hate that. I hate pantser. I wish we could change it, but we can't.
I know. I am definitely more of a pantser. I kind of just, and honestly, usually I don't even really have ideas. I'm like that. Like, I don't even have like usually a plot or a premise when I start writing. Like, I'm just like an artist, and like a student, and like, I don't know, we'll see. And so I'll just start with that.
I noticed that when you said like the original idea, because it was like it was very like, yeah, almost a vibe like you had.
I follow vibes. That's exactly what it is, Eliza.
Relationship of the characters before anything else came. Okay, so in that case, like you have obviously a book that has like dual timelines. So did you ever have to like sit down and write it out? Did you write the two sections separately, or like as you were writing it, were you like going chapter this, then chapter over here, and then back to it, or was it two separate books and you meshed together?
So it's kind of a mix of both of those things. So as things got more complicated, because in the early drafts, it was like when I first got the agent, when I first got the deal with Source Books, there was just one timeline. It was just the present day timeline, and it was really just two perspectives, Max's and Audra's. And Coral, who's a character from the past time, had a bigger voice, sort of a more equal, like tripart voice. And so as time went on, and so basically one of the revision things that my editor said is like, oh, you mentioned in passing this like arts camp, like from the past. She's like, what do you think about like taking us there? And
so I was like, your editor phase?
Yes.
Holy, that's like way late. You know what I mean?
Girl, tell me. and so I was like, she's like, so what if you like wrote a whole like new perspective, like from 30 years prior? And I was like, okay. So I had my like meltdown, like for a couple days where I was like, oh God, like, what if I can't do this? Like, I don't know. And I thought about it. I was like, I think she's right. First of all, I should totally do this. And then the question was like, can I do this? Do I have the ability to do this? Like, and I had to write like 20,000 new words.
Oh my God.
And I had to take out some other stuff that wasn't quite as important anymore. And so then what I had to do is so I wrote the 1988 stuff all at the same time, and then had to create like this is insane, but it's true, a Google Sheet like homemade database system where I was like plotting out like scene by scene how things would thread together. And I was like, I was like one of those like people with those like memes where it's like all the push pins in a board with like yarn tied to other things to like figure out what's going on, like one of those paranoiacs, so that's kind of how it went. So it started off very like loosey goosey pantsing it, and by the end it was like I had a database where I was really having to fit things together and make it work. And I think it threads together pretty well at this point. Yeah. I hope it does. But it was definitely quite a experience.
Well, it's really transformative. I mean, if you think about it it makes it a whole different book. So it's so interesting to me that they kind of like had already, I guess, bought it. Yeah. And they're willing to like take such a,
I know. I was like, oh, okay.
That's like a big, risk. That's so cool. Like, are you?
Yeah, it was cool.
Like the collaborative process is so cool. I was about to ask, do you feel like it's better than what you had before? Like, nope. Yeah,
it totally is. Like, this is the thing I will say for sure is like, it was made better by my collaboration with Sarah, and it was made better by my collaboration with MJ, and I'm really grateful for that. It's a much better book today than it was when Sarah read it in 2018, for sure.
Wow, that's wild. I love that. Okay, so kind of related to that, like what is like your biggest, like, I mean, I guess you don't have to say if you don't want to. What's like your biggest author dream? I don't know. I feel like you might be like jinx. But like, is there like something that's like your sort of dream? Like, oh, I really would love to write a screenplay, or I would love to, it could be, I guess, getting something, but I feel like it's better to have goals that are making something than getting something. Like if you
so I think one thing I would really love to try to do someday, and I haven't kind of figured out how I would do it, is I would love to do like at least like a 2 or 3 book series that's a thriller, but that is not dependent on sort of like
cool.
having it had to be led by like a law enforcement person, because I think that's how you can do it a lot of the times. Then you have a case to kind of change and follow. I'm trying to figure out how do you write like a series of thrillers, even just like 2 or 3 that are interconnected but not led by a cop or a detective.
No,
I'm trying to crack that nut.
Because like obviously the thriller genre, there's a lot of thrillers. And I like that that's kind of like a unique idea. Like I think people would be intrigued by that. Like if they heard that this was like a trilogy. about.
Yeah, so I'm trying to like figure out how would the mechanics of that work. So that would be my dream in terms of like output, is like, how would I make that happen? I'd love to do that.
Well, I know what could connect it, because really at the end of the day, what can connect it, a character or a place, really.
Right. Exactly. Right. Yeah.
Okay, so also kind of related to books, are you working on something new? Can you talk about it at all, or not?
Sure. So there is another fully completed manuscript with Sarah, with my agent right now, and also under consideration in one place at this point. And so we're in the real sort of gray area of that, waiting to see what happens there. But my hope is that it will find a home. I'm very excited about it. I really love it. It's very different from this book, but it's still like a thriller, still like a suspense. Like it's also very dark. Also, I write very dark stuff apparently. But it's so I'm really excited about that, and hopefully there'll be more news on it at some point. But I am very excited about that.
That's so cool, and like what a great position to be in. Like, because I feel like once your first book comes out, like the last thing you ever want to do again is write.
It was one of those things where it did take me a bit to get like into it, and then I was like, oh, I should really try something new. And then it felt good to be doing something new too. I think, like, I don't know if you had this experience, but like you're inside of a book for so long and you're like, I really love it here, but also like, what's the next thing, right? You live with it for so long by the time it comes out. It's interesting.
Yeah, man. Do you have that feeling like where, you're talking about this book and you're like, I wrote that so many years ago. Like, I don't even know. Like, I don't know.
It is like a funny experience because I think it is funny where I'm like, it's incredible and wonderful. The sort of enthusiasm and excitement that people have shown me for this book, which is, I'm so flattered and thankful. And I'm like, this is such a nice reminder that this is new to everybody else, literally, except for like me and like 2 other people in the world, right? And so I have to like remember that, like, this is new for everyone else, and I'm getting sort of those nice second wind vibes from everybody out there. So it's really nice.
Okay. Oh, I had in my mind what I was going to ask. Oh, yeah. What are you reading right now? Are you reading anything right now? Do you read?
Yeah, so right now I'm actually reading, I mentioned it earlier, but I'm reading the latest Pendergast novel. I think it's called Bloodless. That's the one that's out right now. I'm reading that. And I'm also reading Blacktop Wasteland by S.A. Cosby.
Oh, okay. How's that?
Really good. They're like so different, those 2 books, but they're like, like Blacktop Wasteland is like, it's everywhere, and it's everywhere for a reason. It's like super interesting. It's really cool. Like, I'm really digging it. I'm all about vibes, and that book has a lot of vibes in it too. So I'm digging that one.
Okay. Well, I think that we're almost to the point of having people questions, but is there any questions that you'd like to ask yourself before we get there?
I'd like to ask myself. Oh my gosh. Oh boy, this is like turning into therapy.
Whereas I could be like, talk to your future self, or talk to yourself when you were 12. What would you say?
Gosh, no, I would just, I think, reiterate that I am really super grateful for all these opportunities to talk about my book. It's been a really exciting 8 days since the book's been out. It's been really wonderful seeing people's reactions to it. And I just am really grateful to be at this point. It's really wonderful.
Wait, that thing makes me think of another question that I forgot to ask quickly.
Sure.
What has been or you can name more than one, the highlight of being published? Like, was there one moment that you were just like, oh wow, this is the coolest moment, this is made it all worth it, or I'll never forget this?
Yeah, so I think 2 things, 2 highlights. The one of which is that Dark Things I Adore was featured in the crime and mystery section of the New York Times this past Sunday, which blew my mind. And I was I cried. I was like, oh my God, I can't believe this is so crazy. It was so dreamy and wonderful and big and beyond what I ever thought I would get. Cause I'm not a nobody. I'm this is my first thriller. So I was to make it to that place was really cool. Mm-hmm. And then the other sort of super highlight for me, I think, was my husband and I, we got the audiobook and we were listening to it for the first time. And it was really exciting to hear my name in the book, but we got to the dedication and it's for Kevin, my husband. And it was just, we had this really lovely moment where we got to enjoy that together, hearing it out loud on this like official thing that I had made and he had helped so much with, both as like talking through some plot stuff with me and also just being an incredible emotional support through the whole thing, which is like I was up and down a lot about like, oh God, I don't know if I can do this, and, all that kind of stuff. And he really was always there. So I think those are my two highlights.
Well, that's so nice. That must be like such a surreal thing too, right? Because it's just like it just hits you that it's like, oh my gosh, this is like, I don't even know this person talking right now, and people can buy this.
Right.
I'm gonna hear this, and
it makes it feel real in a different way, which is fun. Yeah.
Also, like, huge congratulations on the New York Times.
Thank you.
I feel like that's like where your book belongs because it's just so amazing and accomplished. And just
thank you. That's so
congratulations on being published, on writing such an amazing book. I think maybe he'll pop in for some questions. Yes.
Here I am.
Ah.
So before we get into crowd questions, Eliza, do you want to tell everybody kind of the elevator pitch for your book?
Yeah, so my book, If I Disappear, the hardcover was released in January, and the paperback will come out in November. If you would like to buy a cheaper copy.
It is one of the best covers I've seen, like, ever, I think.
On the cover. Forget the pitch. No,
look at this thing.
The cover was amazing. So the novel is about it's about a woman who's obsessed with true crime podcasts, and she's obsessed with one podcast in particular. And then the host of the podcast goes missing. And so she, armed with all of the knowledge that she has garnered listening to true crime, she goes in to investigate, and chaos ensues.
It gets twisted.
Twists abound.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to turn a couple of Eliza's questions on her real quick because we didn't get answers from her. So Eliza, what are you reading or what have you read lately that you've loved?
Okay. Well, I just read We Were Never Here by Andy Bartz, which is amazing, as are all of her books. It's like the story of these two sort of friends who are always going away on vacations to exotic locales, and people keep turning up dead. And then I also read The Turnout by Megan Abbott, which is just like beautiful. Like, I've read pretty much all of her books as well, I believe. And this one is like particularly, it felt like it really was like evocative to me of like Jeffrey Eugenides, or like, sort of like Donna Tartt writing The Night of the Hunter. Like, it had like this really noir, like creepy 70s thing, but like her writing at the same time is like so beautiful. And then I also read In My Dreams I Hold a Knife by Ashley Winstead, which was like super duper fun. Like, it was kind of like One of Us is Lying in college, like maybe One of Us is Lying meets Secret History, let's say. And it was just like this, it was just a really fun, like really well calibrated book. It has like a lot of characters, and yet you can still like sort of keep track of them, which is really an accomplishment. Yes, so those are all good, and they're all available at Murder by the Book.
They are. I have been dropping links to them as you guys have been talking about them, and also wanted to mention that we do still have some signed copies of Megan Abbott's The Turnout, if anybody out there is interested. She's a huge favorite at the store too. And last question that I'm going to turn on Eliza that she asked everybody but didn't answer herself. What are you working on now?
What am I working on? Well, my next book that's coming out in January, which is already finished, is Good Rich People. And it's kind of like a black comedy of a thriller. Like, it's really crazy. And I actually, like, top secret, but I've been like taking people from like, I write scripts. So I've been writing this. I wrote the script for If I Disappear. And people have been reaching out about this one. And so I'm very excited about the possibility of that becoming either a film or television program, and me writing it, of course, necessarily. And then I also have just handed in, I guess, what would be my third adult book, which I don't know. I've used like, can you talk about it? Who knows? It's about horses and people. And that's all I guess I will say.
I'm so excited for Good Rich People. I'm so excited.
It's really fun. It's completely different than If I Disappear, which I feel like, to me, that's a good thing. Like, I had so much fun with it because I want to be able to like write different stuff.
Yeah.
It kind of puts you in a funny place because you're like, oh, will fans of my other work like this? Or will people, you don't know. So
I'm excited.
It's good to switch things up early so that way you don't have like what everybody expects from you. And then all of a sudden they're like, oh no, I want that. Like, if you keep them guessing, that's a good thing.
Catch them off guard.
Yeah.
So one of the things I think is really interesting about thrillers is titles, because generally they tend to be shorter. They, it's a couple of words, but you have to use like a different couple of words than what everybody else has used, but they also have to be a couple of quick words that are going to like tell you what the story is. And you guys both have really great titles. Can you talk a little bit about the process of coming up with the titles? Let's start with Katie first.
So when I was writing and drafting the book, I had a different title. I had a different working title for it. It was The Agony Record is what it was called when I was drafting it. And then as I was working with source books, they were like, we have some ideas, thoughts for maybe changing the title. Like, what do you think? And they presented Dark Things I Adore. And I was like, oh, that's like perfect. It's like, it totally encapsulates like the vibes of the book. This idea of sort of obsession, love, darkness, all this sort of thing. So I was like, this is amazing. They knocked it out of the park. It was all source books.
And how about you, Eliza?
So for If I Disappear, I feel like that one was like one that just like was super kind of like came up like super organically. Like it's kind of like in the book. And I think it's like also something that to me, like just that phrase, like I think it can almost resonate with anyone, because I think, everyone sometimes, sort of considers their own disappearance. They sort of think like, what would happen if, if I was gone, or, it's like there's also that kind of element of like, sort of like, like a note that's like left behind after someone, is gone. It's kind of really intriguing. And then for Good Rich People, I kind of like polled a bunch of other authors, and there's this one author who's like a romance writer, Rachel Lynn Solomon, whose books are also available at Murder by the Book. And she said, nice rich people. And I was like, oh, that's awesome. But then I changed it to good.
Love it.
Which reminds me too of like Good Country People, which is an amazing short story, also available at Murder by the Book. Flannery O'Connor.
Yeah. So Susan wants to know, she says, if you could pick three, it doesn't have to be three if you want, some people have just done one or two, but what three fictional characters would you like to meet? Let's start with Katie.
Oh boy. Oh my gosh. One I would like to meet is, there's this amazing book called Idaho by Emily Ruskovich. And I would like to meet I can't remember her name now. It's been several years since I read the book, but the female lead of Idaho, I would love to meet. She's in a really kind of complicated, harrowing situation in that book and has to move through it very quietly and with a great emotional intelligence. And I would love to meet her. That's what I'll say.
Perfect.
That's a tricky question.
It is.
I'm going to go with the Trinity: Jesus, God, and the devil. I'm totally kidding. I feel like though, I probably, Katie, you can like relate, but it's like if you're like a thriller writer and a thriller reader, you don't want to meet anyone in those books.
I know, that's the thing.
Not in a dark alley, because even whether they're guilty or not, you spend the whole book thinking they might be.
Yeah. My go-to answer is always, I don't know if either of you read Beatrice Williams. She does these, they're like wealthy East Coast families, the Schuyler sisters, and she's done 3 books, one with each sister. And they're wealthy and they're always drinking and they have all these family secrets. And that's like totally like, I just want to go to one of their cocktail parties once and I'm good.
That's
good
a good
choice.
People to party with. I didn't think about it that way.
That's such a good idea.
It's funny. So when Susan asks the question, some nights she asks about authors that you want to meet, and sometimes she asks about characters. So you mentioned, Katie, that you had been working on some other books that weren't thrillers, that just didn't click and didn't go anywhere. Have you hung on to those? Do you think that those are something that you might go back to later, or are they just like dead to you?
I think for the most part, they're probably donezo. One was a romance novel that was really fun to write. But I just don't think I am knowledgeable enough about the conventions of romance writing to really do it justice. And I think that showed when I was trying to put it out there, but it was really fun. I self-published it for a little while and people seemed to really like it for what it was. Mm-hmm. And so that was fun. And then, I also wrote sort of during grad school at Notre Dame, I wrote sort of like a new adult coming of age story about a musician, this young woman musician in Portland, Maine. And I really like that book. I really like a lot of the things that it does, but I was looking at it recently. I was like, this is maybe a little too precious in grad school. Actually, I don't know how good it actually is. I think I like the idea of that book more than the book itself. Yeah. So I think those are going to be in the past. Yeah.
And Eliza, do you think that you'll go back to doing YA, or are you like solidly in the adult thriller world for a while?
I mean, like I was saying earlier, like I'm just like take it, slowly. We'll see, if I kind of, run it, I don't know. If I had like a really good idea or something that I could, sell and, I was down to my luck, then, anything's possible.
Yeah, I thought it was great that I think it was you, Katie, that or maybe it was you, Eliza, when you guys were talking and you said, what motivates you, and one of you said money, because we yeah, because we all love books, we all love stories, but at the end of the day, unfortunately, it's still a business, and you guys have to be able to eat. Like the bookstore has to be able to pay bills, publishers need to be able to pay editors and cover designers. So I think it's always great to hear people talk about that aspect of it, because as I know readers are aware of that, but I don't think sometimes they think of it as much as like it's a daily thing in the heads of like people who work in the industry, because you have to have that to keep doing what you want to do.
That's why I wrote a book called Good Rich People. But I also think it's interesting, kind of connects to what Katie was saying, because she says, you said you sort of will write fan fiction, like sort of still, which I mean, that obviously like speaks to how you are a writer, like at heart. But also, I mean, I think there is a difference between, what you write, I guess, to publish, and what you write just, for yourself or for, the pure pleasure of writing,
Yeah.
Which is kind of interesting. I mean, you try to find the intersection, I think, really, like you don't want to write stuff that you don't like. But yeah, that's kind of a good way to approach it, I think, because you still are connecting to that like writer and creative soul, because you don't want to get too money oriented.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think it's true. It is good to remember. I think that most writers, and I'll speak for myself, but most writers who you see their books on the shelves, that's not what their full-time gig is, because it's not feasible financially to do it. You don't make that much money being a writer unless you get really, really lucky, So a lot of people are day jobbers like me, and then you do it on the side.
And you don't get healthcare, by the way.
Right. You're just a freelancer, you're self-employed. It's the whole thing.
Down the WGA, man. I need to get some healthcare.
Well, I think that is going to about do it for us for the evening. So just to recap, if anybody tuned in late, we have been chatting with Katie Lattari, whose debut novel, Dark Things I Adore, has just come out. And Eliza Jane Brazier has been kind enough to chat with us. Her book, If I Disappear, came out in hardcover in January. It's about to come out in paperback in November. So you can either pre-order the paperback or we have the hardcover in store. If you missed any part of our chat, once we are done, Facebook and YouTube will archive them so you can rewatch. I also dropped a link to Eliza's earlier event with Stephanie Robles. So if you want to go back and hear her talk a little bit more about If I Disappear, that is also up. I hope if you are wandering around on the YouTube channel, you'll poke around. We've got lots of great stuff up there. Katie and Eliza, thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Eliza.
Thank you, Katie.
Y'all take care.